It was one of those Sunday mornings when I just wanted to go to Home Depot and kill time. I know I should have been at church, but this was so much more fun. I didn't really need anything, but since I hated golf, this was the best alternative. With any luck, the grass and feed would go on sale at the end of the year. 2 years ago, I'd bought 4 bags for a fourth of the regular price. John, it was nice to meet you here. Barry Bartell was a family friend, not very close, but close enough to have coffee and a chat with him, even though I hadn't seen him in almost a year. Coincidentally, Barry's wife Greta and my wife Sheila were leaving tomorrow morning for a week-long Caribbean cruise. Since Barry couldn't take time off from work to go with them, Sheila decided that I should stay home with the kids so that she and Greta could enjoy the seaside vacation together. She insisted that I would be the third extra. Besides, the two girls could save money by sharing a cabin. I didn't like it, but I didn't want to argue. I'm sure you all see where this is going. After a quick greeting ritual, we started wandering around the pest control department. John, I was sorry to hear you couldn't take time off work for the cruise. I was really looking forward to it. What the hell? He was the one who couldn't get off work. What was he looking forward to? Shit, Barry, I've already taken a week's vacation. I'll paint the kitchen while the girls are out. Sheila told me you can't take time off from work. I work for my dad, John. I can leave any time I want. I was getting ready when Greta told me you couldn't make it. Barry and I stood looking at each other in silence. The silence was broken by an old fart driving one of those motorized carts. Are you guys going to stand here all day? I pushed my cart aside and looked at Barry. Do you want to go get some coffee? Sure. We spent the next 2 hours at Mickey D's. It wasn't at all difficult for us to guess that our wives had conspired to go on a 7-day Caribbean cruise without us. The big question was, why did they do it? We both avoided the obvious until we couldn't stand it anymore. It was like the proverbial elephant in the room. Finally, I broke the barrier. So, Barry, are they taking 2 guys with them, or are they planning on hooking up with a couple strangers? He didn't want to answer. I guess he didn't even want to think about possible answers. John, do you want a Dane? He wasn't trying to avoid answering, but I got the feeling he was just trying to delay it. I nodded affirmatively and picked up my empty coffee cup as well. 5 minutes later, we had 2 hot buns and 2 steaming coffees. John, I can't imagine Greta hooking up with a stranger, so we'll have to pick some sort of prearranged occasion. I hate to say it, but I agree. I don't understand why they go on a trip to do this. Wouldn't it be easier to just pick up a guy somewhere close to home? Hell, maybe it would. I'll be honest with you. I don't keep track of what Greta does or where she goes. I've always trusted her and never thought she might be seeing someone. Why would 2 mothers with school-aged children even think about seeing someone? We both tried to sip our coffee, but it was so damn hot we had to give up. We set our cups aside and stared out the window. John, it's probably a couple guys from work. Sheila and Greta worked for International Casualty Insurance. What Barry said seemed to make sense. Is there anything we can do to stop this? Barry, if they know these guys well enough to go on a cruise with them, we're probably already too late. What do you mean? You think they've already cheated on us? I hate to say it, but I'm starting to think so. Barry stood up and walked over to the service counter. A minute later, he returned. Shit. They charged 27 cents for a glass of ice. Why even come here? We each dumped some ice into a hot Java. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. John, come to think of it, Greta's been moonlighting a lot lately on evenings and weekends. I hadn't really thought about it before. I hate to say it, but I'm starting to agree with you. I'm not going to stop Sheila from going, but I'm also not going to just sit on my ass. I finished my Danish and tossed the rest of my coffee into the trash can. Barry, meet me here tomorrow right after the girls leave for the airport. We have some planning to do. Don't say anything to Greta that might show you're aware of what's going on. Barry gave me a thumbs up as I walked out the door. It seemed like he was going to stay and finish his coffee. He didn't look happy. When I got home, things were pretty normal. Our 2 sons, 9-year-old Todd and 10-year-old Jason, were firmly planted in front of the Wii. I felt like they should have been outside, but I gave up on that idea a long time ago. Sheila was acting the same way she always did. I sat and browsed through the paper while she made a light lunch. I expected her to talk about her trip, but she seemed to avoid any conversation on the subject. Of course, that in itself was interesting. After lunch, I finally took the boys outside for a little soccer ball kicking. Sheila was busy inside packing up her things. She insisted on getting everything ready so she could leave in the morning without any problems. I smiled, casting a few glances in the direction of the house. How could I have missed this? How stupid had I been? Why hadn't I guessed this a long time ago? Todd? Jason? I'm going to be busy painting the house next week while your mom is away. How would you feel about spending that week with Grandma and Grandpa Connor? I never waited for an answer. They both headed straight to the house, and 10 minutes later they were packing up. My parents had a farm 20 miles out of town, and they had horses. It wasn't difficult. Sheila grumbled a little, but didn't seem determined to make a fuss about it. By the time I got home, my wife had already made dinner. After getting cleaned up, Sheila went to take a shower. Of course, this gave me the opportunity to do a quick check of her bags. My suspicions were confirmed. 3 things caught my eye. First, most of her sleeping gear was too odd if she was spending time with Greta. The second red flag was the new orange bikini that was carefully hidden in her makeup bag. The last and scariest find was 2 10-packs of condoms that were hidden in a case for. Why would my wife take condoms on a cruise? I berated myself for being stupid enough to ask myself that question. Sheila wanted to get a good night's sleep before the trip, and I decided I wanted to watch a marathon of Steven Seagal movies. I didn't have international coverage on my cell phone. Sheila was using a cell phone she was given at work that had international coverage. I couldn't call her, but she agreed to call home daily or if there were any problems. I told her not to worry if I didn't answer. I could be at my parents' house with the boys or busy painting. My answer seemed to bring her relief. Greta was already at the terminal when I dropped Sheila off. She smiled and waved at me as Sheila joined her. I couldn't wait to see Barry. Barry waited until I parked and then brought us each a couple cups of coffee. At the same time, he pulled out the ice and complained about it again. John, tell me you have some good news. I only shook my head negatively. Greta packed 2 new dresses and lingerie that most women would be embarrassed to wear. Unfortunately, I have equally bad news. A new bikini and a whole bunch of condoms. Oh shit. It didn't even occur to me to look for something like that. I didn't look in her makeup bag at all. I don't know whether to be glad I didn't find anything or regret not looking harder. Barry and I spent the next 20 minutes moaning and groaning over our dilemma. When the coffee was over, it was time for us to get to work. Our first stop was International Casualty Insurance. We walked past the receptionist, stating that we wanted an interview with Kermit Templeton, the head of human resources. Barry and I had known Kermit since high school. We couldn't really be called close friends, but we got along. Oh shit. I was afraid of this. Kermit wasn't very happy to see us. Close the door, will you? Barry and I sat down and tried to get comfortable in chairs that weren't designed for comfort. You know why we're here, don't you, Kermit? I have a damn good idea. Barry and I smiled, but our host did not. We were hoping you could tell us how many people in the company have been on vacation this week. Is that a question? Our smiles turned into frowning faces, and Kermit quickly changed his attitude. He tapped a few keys on his computer and answered with a sigh. Including Sheila and Greta, 14 people are going on vacation. Could you print out a list for us? No, but I think I can give you what you want. Kermit pressed a few more keys on the computer, and the printer next to his desk buzzed. He handed us 2 sheets of paper and waited for a response. They were pages of information about Clayton Mankey and Calvin Bostic. Barry and I looked through them quickly and then turned to Kermit. These 2 gentlemen are on the same cruise ship as Greta and Sheila. There's no point in giving you the rest of the list. That's what you wanted to know. Just curious, do you know who's with who? He reached out and placed a picture of Calvin in front of Barry and another in front of me. Does anyone else know about this? Kermit seemed to have a little trouble giving us an answer, but finally gave up. Guys, everyone knows about it. I thought the company had a policy against this kind of thing. Yes, but it only applies if there's a complaint. And then what happens? Usually a slap on the wrist. And if we want more? You're not going to make things difficult for me, are you? Barry and I looked at each other. Nothing was said, but it was obvious we agreed. Kermit, if those 4 people are still working here next week, we're going to sue. Right now, we don't know how much money or other details, but it will happen. We'll have our attorney contact you or your legal department, whichever you prefer. Any questions? I'm sorry this happened. We took no action because the relationship was consensual. No one was forced or coerced into anything. Of course, we don't know how far it went, but we know it existed. We didn't do anything about it because no one complained. Until now? That's right. Kermit, it's official. You fire all 4 of us and we do nothing. If you do nothing, you can expect a lawsuit, and a very public one at that. Barry and I stood up. Before we left, we shook Kermit's hand. As we walked out the front door, Barry looked at me. So what now? I think we'll meet with the lawyer, then we'll have lunch, and then we'll visit the local travel agency. We parked the cars and were on our way to the lawyer's office when suddenly Barry stopped. I looked at him and shrugged. What? John, what the hell are we going to ask a lawyer to do for us? What do you mean? Well, I think once we walk through that door, it's going to cost us a hell of a lot of money, and we're not going to get anything but a lighter wallet for it. We'll be divorced. We'll be free of those cheating bitches. Think about it. We'll be forced to pay them both alimony. We'll be forced to keep making house payments. We'll be forced to give up custody of the kids and then have to pay for child support. We will have all the unpaid bills piled on us, and the court will probably force us to give our wives credit cards and cell phones. Before it's all over, we'll have to pay for the kids' college too. And what do we get out of it? Nothing, as far as I can tell. Why the hell would any sane person get a divorce? The only reason I can think of is so he can see his kids. That's the whole exchange. Damn it, Barry. I love my kids. I don't want to give them up. I know exactly how you feel. I'll die if I can't see my girls again, but I don't want to bleed to death just because my wife cheated on me. After what happened, the only fair thing to do would be to give the kids to us and make them pay. That's never going to happen, is it? I feel like I'm being blackmailed. We both stood silently in the middle of the parking lot. John, who the hell makes these damn laws? It's so damn unfair. We turned and walked back to the cars. Barry, I have to admit that Sheila is a good mother. If I had kids, I wouldn't do as well as she does. Yeah, I know. It's the same with Greta. She's a good mother and the girls love her. I hate to say it, but she'd be a better parent than me, even though she's a cheating whore. We were both silent, leaning against the hood of my car. I was kicking the fine gravel under my feet, and Barry was playing with the zipper of his jacket. John, you want to go get some ribs? We split a full portion and drank 3 beers each. To kill time, we switched to coffee and ate banana pudding each. We sobered up enough to drive and headed for the Good Times travel agency. Nancy Rayburn was an old family friend who soon became a former family friend. Everyone in our circle of friends and family utilized Nancy's services to plan and schedule their trips. Loyalty is the only thing that has kept her from going broke in the last few years. The internet has eliminated almost all of her competition. As we walked in the door, you could read on her lips, "Oh shit." She didn't need to say it out loud. Barry and I sat down and smiled as we looked at the instrument of our destruction. The other 2 agents sitting next to Nancy got up and left for lunch. One of them had a brown bag on his desk. It was obvious that everyone in the office knew what was going on and was trying to distance themselves. We waited without saying anything. Nancy smiled and tried unsuccessfully to get comfortable in her chair. Finally, she couldn't hold back any longer. "What can I do for you guys today?" Barry and I looked at each other and giggled loud enough for her to hear. I leaned forward and said softly, "You have 5 minutes to tell us everything, or we'll make such a fuss that the police will have to close your office as a crime scene." Come on, guys. Give me a break. I'm not going to tell you any more than your wives told you. You're not going to do anything stupid, are you? Barry stood up and turned toward the office entrance. There were 2 other agents there and 1 couple planning a trip. Listen up, people. I'd suggest you leave the office for a few minutes because we're going to be moving all the furniture. John, Barry. Hold on. Hold on. Okay? Okay. What the hell do you want? Just don't get me or the office in trouble. I don't need the publicity. Good Times Travel Agency was a franchise. Nancy had gotten into trouble over the past year. She didn't want more to be known about it. Barry motioned for everyone to relax and sit back in their seats. Nancy. Who else is going with Sheila and Greta? John? There are over 1,000 passengers on the ship. You know what I mean, Nancy. Who else from International Casualty is on this ship? I can't tell you that. Nancy. What rooms are Sheila and Greta staying in? They're booked on the Sunset deck, in room 113. That's not what I asked, is it? Damn it, John! What are you trying to do? What do you want from me? What rooms are Calvin Bostic and Clayton Mankey booked into? She hesitated a little, which matched well with the concerned expression on her face. She seemed to stammer slightly before I slammed my fist on the desk. Nancy jumped back in surprise, as did the other two travel agents sitting up front. The two clients silently got up and walked away. Damn it, Nancy. What room are those two in? Answer me now and stop playing games. I swear I'll tear this place apart if I have to. Bostic and Mankey are in Sunset Deck, room 115. She uttered the answer barely audible. Barry leaned across the table and looked Nancy in the eye. Nancy? Calvin is sharing a room with my wife Greta? She trembled and tried to push her chair away from the table. Answer me, damn it. Greta and Calvin share a room? This time his fist slammed on the tabletop. Yes. Yes. They're both in 113, and Sheila and Clayton are in 115. I'm not the one who ordered it, they are. I just did what they asked me to do. It's not my fault. Nancy stopped halfway through her sentence. She realized she had already said too much. Give us a copy of the itinerary and everything you have about the cruise. Nancy quickly pressed a few keys on the computer and took 2 folders from the filing cabinet behind her. She slid everything across the desk to us. I think she might have cried, but I wasn't sure. As we got up to leave, I turned to her. Do not contact anyone on this ship or anywhere else to let them know we were here or that we had this conversation. If you do, I assure you, you will be out of business before the end of the month. We walked out of the building and Barry looked at me. How the hell are we going to do this? I have no idea. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. Barry decided that he would leave his 2 daughters, Grace and Marie, with his sister Beth. She too had 2 teenage girls. He was going to come over to the house after everything was settled. We spent the evening reading all the brochures and schedules. After that, it was easy for us to work out a plan. We agreed that our marriages were over and neither of us were even going to try to keep what we had. The main point of contention was the children. We both loved our children, and we both contemplated how the divorce would affect them, especially how we were going to do it. We decided that there would be no divorce on our end. We were both going to decide in our own way how we were going to take care of the kids. I hoped that when things settled down, I could make arrangements with Sheila to live with them together. Of course, I would make sure they didn't need food or money, but I wasn't going to support Sheila either. All of this took planning and work. If things worked out well, I planned to take care of their college tuition as well. Tonight, we had to decide how to handle the immediate problems. There was free Wi-Fi on the cruise ship. Barry was going to take his laptop and download into it all the addresses, phone numbers, and email addresses of all our friends, relatives, and coworkers. Cell phones would still be a problem, but we didn't want to bother with that. The cruise ship was scheduled to dock in Montego Bay on Wednesday morning. We found a cheap sightseeing flight that would get us in at 7 a.m. that morning. Booking a room for part of the cruise was much easier than we thought. It took less than an hour to schedule a flight to Jamaica and book a room for the return cruise. Sheila called and left a message that they had no problem getting settled into their cabin and were already out to sea. She asked me to tell Barry that Greta was also on board. The evening was still just beginning and we were almost ready to go. We were going to spend most of the next day sorting out our financial and personal affairs, bank accounts, bills, credit cards, and personal belongings. I was going to take all my stuff to my parents' house for safekeeping. Barry's brother would look after his stuff. I had a good friend from work who let us park our cars at his place and give us a ride to the airport. I hated having to leave at midnight, but it was necessary. It was only a short cab ride from the airport to the cruise ship parking lot. We watched from a market stall as the Diamond Sunset parked. All we had were 2 carry-on bags and Barry's laptop. We weren't going to dress up, so we had the bare minimum of clothing. 10 minutes later, people started getting off the ship. Some went straight to the center of town, but most headed for the tour buses that waited in a neat row. Everything was well choreographed, as if it had all been done hundreds of times before. Sheila and Greta walked down the walkway with wide smiles on their faces. The 2 guys behind them looked just as happy. When they started holding hands, we could tell which one was Clayton and which one was Calvin. They were good-looking guys, maybe a few years younger than Barry and me, but definitely not Macho Hans. We watched them from our little stools until they all boarded the bus that was to go to Dunn's River Falls. Barry waved at the guy who was taking tickets. He said something to the driver and then came over to us. Jamaicans love to haggle. It took us 5 minutes to convince him to help us. 5 minutes and $200 to be exact. We had no trouble pointing out Sheila and Greta to our new friend, and he happily agreed to take as many pictures as possible of the 2 couples at the falls. When we said we would like to get as racy pictures as possible, he smiled and gave us a thumbs up. The bus was due back at 3 o'clock. We promised to wait with the money. He smiled again and carefully explained that it was a nice camera. Then he winked. We realized that he needed $200 more than a $40 camera. When the buses left, we went aboard to get settled in our room. For another $100, the obliging clerk signed us in as Bob Jones and James Moore. If all went well, we would be incognito for the rest of the cruise. We had a quick bite of sandwiches and then spent the rest of the day familiarizing ourselves with the layout of the ships. Within a couple hours, we knew all the stairs, elevators, and passages. We were going to avoid the dining room and showroom so the wives wouldn't accidentally notice us. Barry set up his laptop and ran some tests. There were no problems with internet access or email. We discussed a plan to break into our wives' rooms, but decided against it. We were comfortably seated in the same booth as before when the buses started to return. The bus to Dunn's River Falls arrived right on schedule. Barry and I were enjoying a couple red labels when Sheila, Greta, and their escorts walked past us. The straw hats we were wearing probably helped conceal us a bit. Our ticket taker approached us, smiling from ear to ear. There was a lot of gold in that smile. He couldn't wait to show us his work and wouldn't stop talking about how great he did everything until Barry shoved a cold beer in his hand. It only took a few seconds to look at the pictures. There was a lot more kissing and hugging in them than we could have imagined. I handed him $200 and a second beer for the driver. We waited a few more minutes to make sure the wives were safely out of the boarding area and then headed back to the cabin. We planned to have a busy night, but first we had to figure out how to eat dinner discreetly. The cabin had a balcony overlooking the entrance to the main dining room. Barry and I took a comfortable seat from where we could watch the passengers lining up for their meals. We guessed that the wives would prefer an early meal so that they would have more time for evening activities such as dancing and entertainment. It wasn't long before the 4 of them showed up and got in line. The couples walked hand in hand, and no one would have guessed they weren't married. Barry threw me a perplexed look as I stood up and walked over to the service phone. 30 seconds later, I returned with a wide grin on my face. The couples were about to be seated when the announcement sounded. Attention! Barry Barthel. Please join your party on the Lido deck. Barry Bartle. It wasn't an overly loud or annoying announcement, but it was loud enough for everyone to hear. Greta immediately turned her head as if there was some invisible loudspeaker in front of her. She stepped aside to let the next group of seated people pass ahead. She and Sheila were talking passionately about something, while Clayton and Calvin stood patiently to the side. Suddenly, Greta pulled out her cell phone and dialed a speed dial number. After 30 seconds, she shook her head as a sign that there was no answer. Sheila pulled out her cell phone and made the call. Both attendants began to look concerned. After Sheila received no response to her call, they all entered the dining room. Damn, John. That was awesome. I'd give anything to hear a conversation during that meal. As juvenile as it sounded, we greeted each other and then went to eat tacos and margaritas on the sunset deck. An hour later, we were back in the room and ready to get to work. Today was a sea day and we were scheduled to arrive in Cancun the next morning. No one at either of our houses answered the phone, and no one knew we were out of town. Even if they had called my parents or Barry's brother, there was no way of knowing where we might be. We downloaded all the pictures from Dunn's River Falls onto the laptop. Some of the pictures showed all four of us, but most were of couples. Some of them showed them hugging and kissing. Sheila was wearing a new orange bikini, and it looked like she'd had a few closet malfunctions on the way to the falls. Each time she seemed to giggle. A video would have been great, but we had to use what we had. Barry made a collage page with about a dozen of the best shots. Of course, Clayton and Calvin were in all of them. We each picked our favorite shot, and Barry put it on an e-card that said, "Having a great time. Wish you were here." By 9 o'clock, we had sent over 200 emails. I was amazed at the number of friends, family, and social contacts we had between us. Of course, everyone at International Casualty received a set of photos. It was windy as hell and almost completely deserted on the sky deck. Barry and I found a quiet, secluded corner and finished off 3 long necks each, gloating about our successful first day. We had no idea what we were going to do the next day, but since the page trick worked so well, we decided to try again. We went to bed early. There was plenty of fruit, danishes, and coffee for breakfast all over the ship. We avoided the main dining areas and the most densely populated common areas. We used the service stairways rather than the elevators. Barry and I were on the back of the sun deck enjoying some kind of rum drink with pineapple. The sun deck overlooked the main pool, which was just starting to get busy. We were on our second drink when Sheila and Greta appeared and made themselves comfortable in a couple of lounge chairs. Clayton and Calvin were nowhere to be found. We had no idea what to do, so we just watched. There was a teenager hanging out on the other end of the deck. He looked bored as hell, except for the cell phone his fingers were dancing on. I'd always marveled at the speed at which teenagers could send text messages on those things. I nudged Barry and we headed toward the guy. How do 2 unmarried men approach a boy on a cruise ship and not look weird in the process? It was awkward as hell, but we eventually made it through. He had no problem letting us use his cell phone for $20. Hello? Hi. Sheila. This is John. I'm sorry I couldn't come to the phone when you called last night. I called home 3 times, John. Your phone says you're calling from Baltimore. I'm sorry. I had to borrow this one. You know I can't call from mine? Is everything okay, John? Your parents had no idea where you were. I'm fine. Just busy. Are you having fun? Yeah. We're having a great time. Too bad you couldn't make it. Okay. Say hi to Greta for me. I have to give the guy his cell phone back. Before I let you go, I wanted to tell you that you look really good in that orange bikini. I don't remember seeing it before. Bye. What? John? Barry and I laughed like crazy as I hung up the phone. Before returning the phone to our benefactor, Barry and I put a call blocker on Sheila and Greta's phones. I gave the guy another 20 and told him to remember he never saw us. He thought that was cool and readily agreed. Sheila and Greta were prowling all over the ship trying to locate me. Sheila covered herself with a large towel as if trying not to be seen. It was a stupid thing to do. She tried twice to call back the number listed, but finally gave up. Clayton and Calvin arrived a few minutes later. Barry went straight to the service phone on the sun deck. A few minutes later, he returned to the railing with a wide grin on his face. Attention. Barry Bartell, please join your party at the shuffleboard court. Barry Bartell, please join your party on the shuffleboard court. As soon as they heard this announcement, there was a flurry of activity by the pool. Greta and Sheila grabbed their things and headed for the shuffleboard court on the port side of the yacht. Clayton and Calvin just stood there looking disgusted. We watched our wives carefully from above. They waited a half hour before leaving. As they were walking back to their room, Sheila pulled out her cell phone and made a call. We realized from the look on her face that the postcards had arrived home. I don't know who she was calling, but it didn't matter. Everyone who knew us as a couple had pictures of Sheila and Greta with their boyfriends. They stood in the middle of the deck for a few minutes looking at the displays on Sheila's cell phone and then headed to the cabin deck. Clayton and Calvin went to the evening dinner without their female companions. They spent the rest of the evening drinking at the cabaret bar on the lagoon deck. Barry and I sat in the far corner all evening with beer and pizza. They never saw us. We tried to decide if we should move closer to overhear their conversation, but decided against it. Our wives never showed up. Around midnight, they both left the bar, completely drunk. Several crew members had to help them back to their cabins. We never found out exactly how they slept, but we didn't care. We were on the sun deck having breakfast of fresh fruit and coffee when the Diamond Sunset docked in Cancun. Most of the passengers were on the promenade deck waiting to sail for the day's festivities. We hadn't yet decided what we were going to do today. It seemed a little silly to us to try to follow two couples while they were ashore. But it didn't matter, because Sheila and Greta were among the first to get off the ship with their suitcases. They weren't going on a day trip, they were getting off the ship, leaving the cruise and deserting the ship. While the rest of the tourists were seating themselves on the tour buses, Sheila and Greta got into a cab and sped off. Barry and I just had to greet each other one more time. We hadn't planned for something like this to happen. At some point, we expected our wives to find us. The boat isn't that big. Obviously, they didn't even try. Clayton and Calvin also left the boat and got on one of the tour buses. We couldn't tell if they were upset about the situation or not. We enjoyed our lunch in the half-empty dining room. The ship had one more stop to make before returning home, in Grand Cayman. We needed to start planning. Maybe later. A nice, leisurely lunch awaited us in the dining room. Most of the passengers were ashore, but since Sheila and Greta were gone, it didn't matter. Things became much more relaxed and enjoyable. The ship would leave Cancun tonight and arrive in the Cayman Islands tomorrow afternoon. Tonight would be a good time to have a heart-to-heart talk with Clayton and Calvin. Barry and I had no idea what we were going to tell them. Seats were assigned in the formal dining room. Of course, our wives and their boyfriends had gotten a nice table for 4, and 2 seats were now empty. Barry and I waited until Clayton and Calvin were seated, and then we just walked over to their table and sat down. No one stopped us or questioned us. It was time for introductions. Good evening, gentlemen. I assume you both know who we are. Is that correct? Calvin managed a brief nod to Barry and me, but Clayton only grinned. His eyes darted back and forth between us, and his head was tilted forward. It was easy to see that he wasn't happy to see us. Their reactions were different. Calvin seemed scared and unsure, while Clayton was just pissed off. Gentlemen, Mr. Barthel and I will not be dining with you. There are 3 days left on the cruise, and we just wanted to warn you to be extra careful. I heard Barry snicker, but didn't look in his direction. Calvin looked curious, but Clayton only seemed to get more pissed off. Just remember that 222 people fall overboard on pleasure cruises every year and are never seen again. I paused for a few seconds for dramatic effect, and then Barry and I stood up and left the dining room. We could hear Calvin chattering, but couldn't make out what he was saying. We both decided to have tacos and beer for dinner. We didn't go out on the deck because of the damned wind, but the sunset was beautiful through the living room windows. Well, John, that was cool. I don't know what you expected, but you sure got their attention. I'm not sure I did either. Let's wait until tomorrow and then we'll see. Well, things didn't quite go as planned. Gentlemen, I'm Mr. Sorensen. If I could have a moment of your time, please. Barry and I turned our chairs around so that we were face to face with the large Nordic crewman who was addressing us. With him were 2 other crew members who stood quietly off to the side. I looked over at Barry. We smiled at each other and then nodded to this paragon of authority. Am I talking to Mr. Jones and Mr. Moore or Mr. Barthel and Mr. Connor? Barthel and Connor. There didn't seem to be any point in lying to them about our identities. Several of our passengers reported that you threatened to throw them off the ship. Do you have an explanation as to why they might have done so? Oh no. We didn't threaten them. We simply quoted statistics of accidents at sea. In fact, we advised them to be careful. It was a veiled threat, and you both know it. Why would we do that? The big Swede, or whatever his name was, nodded toward a quiet part of the living room, and we all moved in that direction. Gentlemen, did you threaten Mr. Bostic and Mr. Mankey? Barry and I looked at each other and seemed to agree on an answer. Yes. Although it wasn't phrased as a threat, we said it with that intent. Was there a reason for that threat? Of course there was. In fact, you were part of that reason. I could tell by the look on his face that he was waiting for a more detailed explanation. Mister? Sorensen, Nordic Cruise Lines, booked these 2 gentlemen into cabins with our wives. Mr. Bostic spent the week with Mrs. Bartell, and Mr. Mankey shared a stateroom with my wife. It seems that Nordic Cruise Lines is organizing some sort of cruise with entertainment on the high seas. You cater to married women looking for a way to spend time with their lovers. I'm sure legally you're fully protected from such a thing, but it looks and sounds horrible to me. Mister, Connor, I understand your frustration with your wife's actions, but surely you don't think the cruise line encourages or condones such actions. We are a family-oriented company, and we intend to remain so. Neither Barry nor I had an answer for him. Of course we had something to say, but at the moment it seemed best not to say anything. We both leaned back in our chairs and smiled. Sorensen looked a little flustered, but still in control of the situation. I'm afraid we're going to have to report this to the authorities. They'll probably have some questions for you. What authorities? We're on the high seas. You're the authorities, aren't you? Mr. Connor. Mr. Barthel, I'd like you to avoid any contact with Mr. Mankey and Mr. Bostic for the rest of the cruise. Can you give me a guarantee that you won't cause any problems before you arrive in Miami? Barry and I smiled and nodded. The entire group disappeared, leaving us to sit alone. We spent the rest of the evening in the cabin sending emails to every trashy media outlet in the area. We exaggerated a lot and outright lied, but figured that if even one or two of them picked up on the information, we'd be vindicated. We even attached some photos, even though we knew they couldn't be published. The next morning, we had a hearty breakfast in the dining room. Clayton and Calvin did not show up for the meal. Later, we passed by their rooms and saw the breakfast dishes standing by the doors of their cabins. As the ship docked at the Grand Cayman Islands, we watched Calvin walk down the gangway with his luggage. Good old Calvin was leaving the ship. He left his mate alone. Barry and I decided to spend the day on shore. There wasn't much of interest there, but we swam with the manta rays. It was fun, but I kept thinking about that damn crocodile hunter. It was the only thing we did on the whole trip that wasn't motivated by revenge. In the evening, we enjoyed a full dinner again. Clayton was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps he had left the ship after us, but I highly doubted it. Barry had received over 30 email responses to the postcard we had sent out. Most of them were of the LOL type, but a few were either serious or took us to task for doing such a despicable thing. We were happy to know that they reached our target audience. Friends and acquaintances seemed to find it humorous, but the responses from family members included rebukes of us. There have been no messages from Sheila and Greta. We will be home tomorrow, so we made sure both phones were fully charged. Before we went to bed, we sent out 32 press releases, even though we had no idea what a press release was or how it should be prepared and transmitted. One of them we made sure to send to Piccolo World Tours, the company that owns the Good Time Travel Agency franchise. We went a little overboard in accusing Nancy Rayburn of planning trips so married housewives could have romantic dates with their boyfriends. We made it look a lot worse than it really was, but heck, we were trying to get our point across to her, and she deserved it. The rest of the story ended up in newspapers and exposing TV shows. Hopefully we'll get some response. It was a good day and we had a good night's sleep. The next morning we had breakfast on the deck of the Lido. After we finished, Barry turned on his cell phone. He had 6 missed calls and they were all from his sister. I only had 1 from my father. We split up and both made our first calls since the trip started. Dad, it's John. I see you've been trying to call. What's going on? Well, son, I'm guessing you know a lot more about this than I do. All I know is that Sheila showed up on Wednesday and took the boys with her. I know you asked me not to let her take them, but I couldn't stop her. Later I went into the house, but she wasn't there. Since the front door was unlocked, I went in and looked around. Most of her clothes and the children's clothes were gone. It looked like she was in a hurry to get somewhere. She didn't say anything about where she was going. Jason grumbled a little about having to leave, and I heard her say something about Noble's Grove. It seemed to cheer him up. Sheila's sister Loretta lives in Mount Carmel. That must be where she went. I'll see if I can find a phone number and call her. John, we got the postcard with the pictures. Could you tell us what the hell is going on? I think it's pretty clear, Dad. Sheila decided to go on an ocean cruise with a guy she used to work with. She left me at home to watch the kids while she enjoyed the company of another man. What do you want me to do, son? You lock the house? Yes. That's all I could think of. Barry and I hadn't planned on going home right away, but things look a little different now. I've decided that Sheila will stay in the house with the kids. I have no idea why she left. So what are you going to do? I'm not sure, but I think I'll see you in a day or so. In the meantime, I'll keep you posted. Thanks for calling, Dad. I walked over and poured myself a coffee while Barry continued to talk. He didn't look happy. We both guessed that our wives would be coming home to the kids, and we planned to live away from home for a few months while we decided what to do. We planned to look for work in the Pensacola area. Barry returned with a dejected expression on his face. He grabbed a Danish off the buffet table and sank into the chaise lounge across from me. Gosh, you look as happy as I am. My traveling companion smiled weakly and hummed. She's gone, John. Greta's gone and left the kids with my sister. What, she left the kids? What did she say? According to Beth, pretty much nothing. She thanked Beth for watching them and then talked to the girls for a few minutes. Beth said her car was full of clothes. I don't know how she knew I left the kids there. She was alone when she left. What about the house? Beth's husband said no one was in the house. All the furniture and things were there, but Greta didn't live there. He didn't go inside, but I assume all her clothes are missing. Things didn't go according to plan for me either. Sheila found out the boys were at my parents' house and took them from there. I think she went to her sister's in Mount Carmel, but I'm not sure. She took all her clothes and the boys' clothes with her. It looks like my house is empty too. For a few moments we sat in silence. Barry looked at me and sighed. I know it's early morning, but I need a beer. We spent the rest of our cruise in the Lido Lounge, drinking more beer than we were used to. We walked up to the dock railing as the ship departed and watched the tired passengers heading home. We didn't see the Clayton sail, but the place was pretty crowded. The friendly bartender informed us that the lounge was now closed, and we went down to our stateroom, where we found all our belongings packed and lying in the aisle. We were informed that we would be met by authorities to answer for our threatening behavior. We didn't really understand which authorities we were talking about, but it didn't matter. No one escorted us off the ship, and no one was expecting to meet us. It was, to put it mildly, an anticlimax. Not that I was disappointed, but we were hoping for a little media attention. But none of that happened. Barry and I took the last 2 seats in the airport limo van. One-way tickets home unannounced were damn expensive, but we didn't feel like we had a choice. On the return flight, we hardly spoke at all. Things didn't go as planned, and we were both a little depressed. Barry still had his kids, but no wife. I had no kids and no wife. Returning to an empty house was not a pleasant experience. There were no notes or messages from Sheila in the house or on the phones. I called her work number and found out that she no longer worked at International Casualty. I didn't know for sure, but I guessed that Greta, Clayton, and Calvin no longer worked there either. I spent the rest of the first day tidying up the house and throwing out things that belonged to Sheila that she was missing or didn't need. Barry was greeted the same way. All he had left was the short trip Greta had made to say goodbye to her daughters. Beth said Greta cried when she left the house. We both shut off access to credit cards and money. Greta was a big girl now and could handle herself, but Sheila had Todd and Jason. I had to figure out how to take care of them. I was upset that she took them away, but I should have realized that she was their mother and had to take care of them and protect them. Apparently, Greta wasn't confident enough to take the risk. It was a win-win situation, at least for the children. Barry and his daughters had moved into their home, and things seemed to be normalizing as one would expect. Beth looked after the girls while Barry was at work and helped Barry around the house as much as she could. My life was completely different. All that awaited me was TV and microwave dinners. I made some inquiries and found out that Calvin Bostic had left town right after he was fired. Clayton had been fired too. No one knew where he worked or lived. I called Sheila's sister Loretta to find out what had happened to the kids, but to no avail. Loretta claimed that Sheila had stayed one night and then left without telling anyone where she was going. I didn't really believe her, but I had to take her word for it until I found out otherwise. As strange as it may seem, Barry and I had drifted apart. He had a family or part of one, and I had nothing. I tried to spend time with him and the girls, but it was never comfortable. At the beginning of the new school year, I went to the administrative office at the boys' old school. I told them that I wanted to make sure Todd and Jason's school records were transferred properly. A very kind young lady readily assured me that the paperwork had been sent to North Schuylkill Elementary School in Frackville 2 weeks earlier. She seemed proud to have that information, and I thanked her warmly. It didn't take me long to find out the new cell phone number Sheila was using. I had to dial the number 3 times before she finally answered. Caller ID is a nice feature, unless someone is using it to avoid talking to you. I didn't drag out the conversation. I asked her to meet me at the food court at the Frackville Mall. I waited for over half an hour for her to show up. It was our first contact since her love cruise, and I was determined not to mention it at all. I had a large coffee in front of me, but it had gone cold by the time she sat down at the table. We didn't speak or greet each other. Finally, I had to melt the ice. I want you and the boys to go back to the house. Sheila squirmed slightly on the hard plastic mall seat. She hadn't taken a drink before she came to the table, so her hands were empty. All four of you together? No. Just you and the boys. I have a small apartment nearby. The house will be more familiar and comfortable for Todd and Jason. They'll be able to go back to their old school, and I'll be able to see them regularly. I can't afford to live in a house. I'll take care of the rent and utilities. I will give you money for food and other household expenses. I will also take care of the boys' clothing and school expenses. What about me? You're a big girl now, Sheila. I think you can take care of yourself on your own. I'll have to work. Arrange it so you can work while the boys are at school or in the evening so I can keep an eye on them. I'm sure you'll be able to find something to do. It was a bittersweet moment for her. I don't know what she expected or what she was willing to settle for. Her gaze darted around the mall as if her brain was working or she was searching for something. I'm sure there was both good and bad in this offer from her perspective. Okay. I'll do it for the boys. You're right. It will be better for them. When do you want to do it? I'll move out in the next couple days, and you can move in whenever you want. The deed was done. The whole conversation took less time than my waiting in that damn hard chair. For a few moments, we both sat in silence. John, is there anything else you want to talk about? That was my cue to leave. I immediately stood up and placed the empty paper cup on the table. No. I'm not sure, but I think I saw a small tear in her eyes before I walked away and left the mall. When I looked back, she was still sitting there. The next 6 months passed without incident. Sheila found a job that allowed her to work while the boys were in school. I would leave them at my apartment on the weekends, and she would leave them during the week. Barry got a divorce petition from Greta, or whatever it's called. It came from Nevada. His daughters lived with him, and it seemed like they had it under control. I think his sister and mother were helping him. Things at work were going much better than expected. Unfortunately, to get ahead in the company, I would have to move. Under the circumstances, I was hesitant to move. Christmas was approaching, and then it all came crashing down. I was just returning from lunch when I found Todd and Jason waiting for me in the office. What's going on? Why aren't you at school? The furnace broke. We were all sent home. Jason just stared at his feet and Todd started talking. What are you guys doing here? We went home first and then decided to come here. The key was under the mat. You could have come in, right? Now they were both looking at the floor. What's going on? What are you hiding? Jason decided to enter the conversation. He spoke quickly and seemed to stutter a little. When we got home, my mom left her bedroom door open. She was in there with that guy, Clayton. He was in the house, in the bedroom? Yes. They were doing it, Dad. They were both naked and doing it like on the internet. I sat down and said nothing. What could I say? How could I erase that image from their memories? Jason held out his cell phone. Here. I took pictures. It only took a few seconds to see that everything they'd told me was true. Todd seemed to want to add that Clayton had been to the house several times and that Sheila had asked them not to say anything about his presence. She told them that if I got mad, they would all have to move back to Frackville. We talked for a few more minutes and decided that the boys should move in with me. I gave them the keys to the apartment and sent them on their way. I then went to the Human Resources office. Mind it, North Dakota didn't look like a resort place, but they had an immediate vacancy and I was available. I spent a few hours dealing with financial matters and then headed for the house. Sheila must have been at work because the house was empty. The bed wasn't made, so I figured she had come home for an afternoon nap. I didn't even realize Clayton was still around. I had just finished loading the last of the boys' things into the car when she walked in the front door. John? What the hell is going on? I thought we had a deal. Where are you going with all this stuff? The arrangement is gone, Sheila. Me and the guys are leaving. You can yell all you want, but it won't change anything. You can't take my boys, John. I won't let you. And the courts won't let you. I'm taking them. If you want them back, you can go to court and explain everything to them. What does that mean? She stood with her hands on her hips, a defiant smirk on her face. I set the last bag on the floor and turned to face my loving wife. What did you do for lunch today, dear? What the hell does that have to do with anything? What business is it of yours what I did for lunch? It's none of your damn business. She was just overflowing with self-esteem. You know the heating system broke down at school today? What are you talking about? The school furnace went out this morning. All the kids were sent home at lunchtime. I'm going to ask you again, honey. What did you do for lunch today? The bravado left her face as she sank down on the living room couch. She didn't say anything, just sat there. I picked up the last bag but stopped at the door before I left. Jason took pictures. I hope Clayton has health insurance because he's going to need it. I let him go last time, but now he's going to have to pay. She didn't cry or fall into a dead faint. She just sat there like a zombie. I tried not to slam the door because I didn't want to ruin the mood. We bought a small trailer and had everything packed by the end of the week. I drove by Clayton Mankey's house, but the owner claimed he'd left the day before and hadn't left an address. I decided that Clayton would be a good project for later. I learned that Sheila had contacted an attorney about custody of the boys, but never made any attempt to contact me about it. We quickly settled into the new house and the boys liked everything. For some strange reason, they never missed their mother. It was about 6 months later when I received the divorce papers from Carson City, Nevada. She never asked for anything, and I never offered anything. It always bothered me that she didn't fight for custody of her sons. I think about it often but never mention it. I think it is very important that the boys have a mother. Next week, I'm going to start looking for a mother. Todd and Jason have agreed to help. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.